I don't know what it is about 2024, but it is the resurgence of King Arthur in my reading this year. I already read Legendborn and Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn, and this past month I read The Lost Queen and The Forgotten Kingdom by Signe Pike, so we have to talk about it. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sasha. Today we are going to be doing a book review. I did get originally both of these books as ARCs from NetGalley. Thank you so much, NetGalley, for giving me e-ARCs of these in order for me to review them. I have a whole series I'm doing on my channel. I don't have it posted yet because it's sort of a behind the scenes where I am trying to tackle my NetGalley ARCs from many moons ago. At one point in my life, I was an assistant librarian and then an elementary school media specialist, and I was requesting quite a few ARCs before, during, and after the panini that happened worldwide, and a lot of those books I ended up not doing reviews for, not getting a chance to read. I'm trying to rectify as much of that now as I can. Initially, when I started the project, I think I had 29 books to review. I think I'm down to 23, so we are slowly chugging along, and I am trying to do reviews after I finish those books. I always am doing a written review on my blog. You can check the link down below, readwithme.sashamarie.com. And then if I get a chance, I'm trying to also do video reviews so that a different group of people can try and find these reviews, see if these books are something they might like. So I had initially read Outlander a few years ago. I read the first 3 books before it became a little too outlandish for me, which is a joke I make every time I talk about those books. I loved the romance aspect. I loved the historical aspect. I just loved so much about it, but sometimes the violence just felt too much, so I had to take a little bit of a break, and that is actually why I decided to pick up The Lost Queen. When these books were posted on NetGalley, they were quoted as being like Outlander, comparable to that series, and because I had such a big love for Outlander, I knew that I was really going to enjoy this. This story follows Merlin and his twin sister as they grow up together and as they sort of meet the infamous Pendragon Arthur, King Arthur as he's known to us today. There was so much in this, historically speaking, that I definitely want to do some more research, maybe get some nonfiction about King Arthur in general and sort of the people surrounding his myth and legend. There were discussions about Britons, there were discussions about Westmen, about Angles, about Picts, about so many different groups of people, and I don't necessarily know who they would be by like today's standard. Like, it was a little too much for me to try and take in, especially because this was the first full-length novel I was reading after I had surgery. So my mental capacity, not functioning at 100. However, I will say I don't think it's a requirement or necessary to understand who is coming from where in terms of the characters and the discussions of politics, because it's very clear to see who the bad guys are. Like, that's obvious whether you understand who they are in the actual historical context or not. For me, at least, I'll say. What I loved so much about this story is that we are following Merlin's sister, Langareth. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not. We follow her as she is a child to a teenager, all the way up to her early 30s. And it was just so beautiful, whimsical, and absolutely crushing and heartbreaking getting to watch just one character grow up before our eyes, and we got to grow up with her as so much turmoil is happening in her land. There are so many wars. Men are just horrific in so many different ways, and this book was an immediate 5 stars for me. I became so invested in this woman, in her story, in her family, and when she would become emotional about something, I would be sobbing right along with her because it was just such a crazy, crazy read. I felt such a deep emotional connection to Langareth in this first story, and that was a little bit interrupted when we got to the Forgotten Kingdom. This is book 2 in the series, and what was interesting about this book is in book 1 we just follow one point of view. In book 2 we follow 3 points of view. So we follow Langareth, we follow her brother, Lalakin, who is Merlin, and then we follow a secret character I'm not going to tell you about because it is a pretty big spoiler. I think splitting up the points of view was a positive and a negative. A positive because we got to see so much more of the countryside. We got to see so many different cultures and people that way, and we got to see so much more of the conflict from different perspectives, different areas. However, whereas with book 1, my emotional connection to our main character was just like totally in sync. In book 2, I didn't feel as emotionally invested in everything because we were splitting between 3 characters. So the ending of book 1 was so tragic. I had a feeling it was going to get worse in book 2, but the first quarter of book 2 literally ripped my heart out, and it was so painful to read. But the rest of the book, it was almost because that part was so traumatic that the rest of the book kind of flowed a little more just like even keel. It was a little easier to get through. And I definitely think I liked the first book a little bit more, but it was really fun getting to see these 2 new characters, getting their experiences. We had another character who we followed from being a child to being a teenager. And so I'm hoping that in book 3, we're going to continue following these 3 characters because the secret character has a really, really exciting character arc. And I just can't wait to follow her life and her story and see what's going to happen next. I'm sure there's going to be more heartbreak for all of these characters. I don't know if you've been on TikTok or if you're as chronically online as I am, but there has been a discussion about the man versus the bear, and there is actually a quote in this book where they discuss that. And obviously, this was written before the big TikTok trend of like man versus bear, and it literally almost brought me to tears because so much had happened in the chapters before, and then that comment was made, and me reading it at the same time that the discussion is happening on TikTok was just like, I was so sensitive to the topic already, and then to see a character I care about so much having to state that for the reasons she did as a child was just like gut-wrenching, a gut punch. It was so heartbreaking. Both of these books are so beautifully written. They are an incredible tale that is woven through history. It's woven in with some fantasy elements, but I honestly have a hard time deciding if it's just historical fiction or historical fantasy, because the fantasy elements are things that we could consider like just religious beliefs, like believing that animals are signs and predictions. If an animal flies a certain direction, it means a certain thing if you're watching those signs. Having dreams be premonitions, being able to make potions and other things to help heal people, having all of these different sort of properties wrapped together, like taking mushrooms, going on a trip, but it being just like this awakening, this big thing that happens to these characters. And it's like a certain group of people have this knowledge and it stays within that certain group of people. And that's kind of what gives it the fantasy element, is that these gifts aren't open to everyone. They're not shared with everyone. You are sort of chosen by the gods to be accepted. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect to this novel, because I don't know that I would call it a fantasy element, because it's more of just a belief system. And I can get on board with that. So those are my thoughts on these books. I loved them so much. The third book, when I checked, should be coming out in December of this year. So hopefully, I don't know if it's the conclusion, but hopefully we will learn more about the fates of these characters. I can't wait to read it. I hope you are excited about this story as well. It's definitely left me wanting to look up more about this time period from a historical context, from a nonfiction context. I very rarely dip my toe into nonfiction, but these books have made me very curious. And I think I even want to look more into King Arthur's tale, because while I did take a King Arthur class in college, which meant my reading of Tracy Deon's books was super smooth because I was familiar with all the players in the King Arthur and the Round Table, reading this, not the same experience, because they all have different names, they all have different, just like where they come from, everything. The only thing that remained the same was Pendragon. That's the only way I could tell who was who. I didn't even know who Merlin was the entire first book until I started book 2. And then I was like, oh, he's Merlin! So it was kind of, it would have been better if I had a more firm academic knowledge of history and time period and King Arthur. Because I have more of an academic knowledge of King Arthur tales and like the stories of the Round Table, but not the history of like what land did King Arthur originate from? What were all of these people probably actually in real life called? Like so many things I'm missing from my education on King Arthur and history in general of this setting and time period and place and location in history. So I have some research to do, potentially. Maybe I can do it before the last book or the third book. I don't know that it's the last. I'm rambling now. I'm gonna go. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next one. Bye!